So nice to see you. So nice to see you. So I understand you're 105. Well, how come you look so good? What's your secret? It's wonderful to see you. God bless you. No, I'll come down and hug you down. Who's got the picture, somebody? Well, we're gonna can I just say Michelle's got a strong breath? I know for your birthday, I remember her telling me about it. Well, it's so nice to meet you. Good to see you, Helen. Good to see you. Good to see you. How are you? Nice to see you, Amy. Nice to see you, Nigel. Good to see you. Good to see you, Scott. Charlene. So nice to see you. You've got this with me. You've got some good looking grandkids. Nice to see you, Linda. How are you, sir? Good. Nice to see you, Lamar. So nice to see you. And Chewy. Nice to see you. Whitney. Good to see you. Nice to see you. How are you? Good to see you. Nice to see you, Tom. So nice to see you. Good to see you, Bob. Hey, who else we got here? David. David, how are you? Good to see you, James. You don't sing, do you? Yes, I do. You do? Good to see you. How are you? Nice to see you. How you doing, Matt? So nice to see you, Matt. Well, everybody have a seat. Have a seat. I just want to, first of all, I want to thank Matt and Stephanie, who were making their backyard available until it got really wet. And Matthew and Lucy, who are our official hosts today. And I'm so appreciative of that. I want to acknowledge our mayor, Dwight Jones. Thank you so much for being here. And of course, I got to say thanks again to Michelle for being here. We are graced by your presence. This is really a casual setting, so I hope that we just open it up for a good conversation about where the country's at, where it's going, how folks are feeling down here in Richmond. I want to hear from you at least as much as you're hearing from me. I find this really useful to me because when you're in Washington all the time and you're in these battles, sometimes you're in what's called the bubble, and I'm always trying to do what I can to break out of it and be able to get back with folks and have a conversation. What I want to do is what I want to do is just speak briefly about what's going on in the economy, and then just open it up. Obviously, we're going through a tough time, and these last 2 years have been as tough as any that we've seen in most of our lifetimes, except for Michelle. Because the truth is that the financial crisis that we experienced was the worst since the Great Depression. We lost about 4 million jobs in the 6 months before I was sworn in to office. We lost 750,000 jobs the month I was sworn into office, 600,000 jobs the 2 months after I was sworn in. So before any of my economic policies were put into place, we had already lost most of the 8 million jobs that we ended up losing in this recession. And my first job was to make sure that the banking system did not completely collapse and to make sure that we didn't dip into a second depression. And we've done that. The economy that was contracting is now growing. We've had 8 straight months of private sector job growth, so we're making some progress. But the truth is that people were having a tough time even before the crisis hit. We had gone from 2001 to 2009. There was a period in which the average middle-class family lost 5% of their income, 5% of their wages during that period. At the same time, the cost for health care and college tuitions were skyrocketing. It was the slowest period of job growth since World War II, from 2001 to 2009. So middle-class families were generally having a very difficult time even before the crisis hit. And obviously the crisis just made things worse. And this is all at a time when we've got increased global competition. I mean, you've got countries like China and India and Brazil that are really moving. They're educating their kids much more aggressively than they ever were. They are exporting much more than they ever were. And so we're having to compete at levels that we didn't have to compete before. And so part of the reason I ran for president was because I felt it was very important for us to start grappling with some long-standing issues that we've been putting off for way too long. We had to stop a healthcare system that was broken from bankrupting families and businesses and the federal government. So we initiated health reform so that we could start getting a better bang for our healthcare dollar. And it's estimated that we'll end up saving over $1 trillion because we make the system more efficient over time, even though we're going to be insuring more people. We had to re-regulate the financial system so we never have a situation where we've got taxpayer bailouts again. And so we passed financial regulatory reform. We had to transform our education system. And one of the things I'm most proud of, although it hasn't gotten some of the fanfare that some of these other issues have gotten, is we've initiated reforms across the country through a program called Race to the Top, where we're encouraging states to reform how they do business, emphasizing more math, emphasizing more science, making sure that we've got the very best teachers in the classroom, making sure that we're focusing on low-performing schools, because it's unacceptable where you've got schools in which a third of the kids or half of the kids drop out, and even the kids who graduate aren't graduating at grade level. We used to be at the top in terms of math and science performance. Now our kids typically rank around 21st in science and 25th in math. And that's just not acceptable. We used to have the highest proportion of college graduates in the country. Now we rank around 12. And that's going to affect how we can compete long term. So part of what we did was to shift tens of billions of dollars that were going to subsidies to financial services groups in the direct student loan program, to give those dollars directly to students, and we've got millions more students who are now getting grants and cheaper student loans. Now the other thing that we had to do is we had to confront all these problems, a financial crisis, people losing their jobs, small businesses not getting the financing they need to open or expand their businesses. We had to all do this in the context of a really bad budget. You know, when Bill Clinton left office, we had a record surplus. We hadn't had a surplus since World War II. And suddenly, by the time I took office, we had a $1.3 trillion deficit. And this was a direct result of some policies that thought only about the present and didn't think about the future. So we had tax cuts mostly for millionaires and billionaires in 2001 and 2003 that weren't paid for, and there weren't the cuts to go with it. So that ballooned the deficit. Then we had two wars that weren't paid for. That further ballooned the deficit. We had a prescription drug plan that was put into place that cost about $800 billion. That wasn't paid for. So you add all those things up. By the time I got into office, we already had a $1.3 trillion deficit, and we had exploded the national debt. So one of the challenges now that I've got, having stabilized the economy, but we still need it to grow, we still need small businesses to get help, we still have to help people find work, we want to invest in research and development and technology. We've got to do all that, but we've also got to think, how are we going to get our budget under control over the long term? And I was amused as I was driving in, there were some signs there that said, cut spending, which, sounds plausible, and I know your congressman here, I think, has strong ideas about what he says he wants to do. Last week, the Republicans put forward what they called a Pledge to America, which purported to say we're going to cut your taxes, and we're also going to control spending, and we're going to somehow balance the budget. But when you actually looked at the numbers, it was hard to figure out how they all added up. Now, I'm not a math teacher, But I know a little bit about math. They're proposing about $4 trillion worth of tax cuts. About $700 billion of those tax cuts are for people who typically are millionaires and billionaires and on average would get $100,000 in tax relief. $700 billion that we don't have, we'd have to borrow in order to provide these tax cuts. And 98% of Americans wouldn't see any benefit from it. And keep in mind that because we don't have it, it would actually end up costing more than $700 billion because we'd end up having, since we're borrowing it, we'd have to pay interest on it. Now, just to give you some sense of how they are proposing to pay for this, they're recommending a 20% cut in education spending. They are proposing essentially that we lower our support to students on student loans who want to go to college and grants for students who want to go to college, which would affect millions of students all across the country. They are proposing to roll back tax cuts that we put in place during the Recovery Act that give 95% of working Americans tax relief. So when you add it all up, essentially the proposal would drastically expand the deficit instead of shrinking it. Now, what they'll say is, well, we're going to have additional cuts. But they don't specify what those cuts would be. And one of the things I'm here to tell you, and then I want to sort of hear from you in terms of what your priorities are, is, I've got some very smart people working for me in my budget office. But they will tell me that one thing they can't do is cut taxes for the wealthiest Americans by $700 billion, protect Social Security, protect Medicare, protect veterans funding, and balance the budget. They just can't do it. The math doesn't add up. And so part of the challenge, I think, particularly if we're thinking about the next generation, is making sure